Hi everybody and welcome to Snake Supervisor training. My name is Sienna and I am a conservation technician with the Land Between Charity. And today I'm going to be taking you through the monitoring protocol for monitoring snakes in your backyards under artificial cover objects. First, just an outline of the presentation. First, we're going to go into exactly what a backyard snake supervisor is. We're going to go over what will be included in your Snake Supervisor package when you register as a Snake Supervisor. We'll point you in the right direction of where you need to go to take the Snake ID training, which is available in another presentation. We'll go over some general safety, where and when to survey, what you'll need to survey, some species at risk snakes that we would like to pay special attention to, and then finally the survey procedure. Okay, so first, what exactly is a backyard snake supervisor? A backyard snake supervisor is a citizen scientist who surveys for and reports on snakes found in their backyards. Backyard snake surveying or cover object surveying involves placing artificial cover objects, which we'll go over in a bit, around your property in suitable snake habitat, which we will also go over, and then surveying for snakes that you find under and around them, and subsequently reporting those snakes that you find. So when you register as a backyard snake supervisor, which you may or may not have already done, but if you haven't, I highly encourage you to do so on the Land Between website. You will be sent a package that will include, number one, a copy of the backyard snake surveying guidelines, which we will go over later in this presentation, but it's basically a step-by-step outline of what to do to survey for snakes in your backyard. You'll also be sent a Snake ID decision tree, which is a tool designed to help you identify the snakes that you find. Essentially, you'll answer the questions in the decision tree, and it will point you in the direction of a snake that you might be seeing. You'll also be given a Snake ID sheet, another tool to help you identify the snakes that you find. They'll include photos of each of the 12 snake species found in the Land Between, as well as a brief description of each of them. And finally, the package will also include a field sheet for you to record all of your data on while you're out in the field actually surveying your cover boards, and you can then transcribe that information from the field sheet into the online reporting form at the end of each of your surveys. So in terms of Snake ID training, there is a separate presentation going over how to identify each of the 12 snakes found in the Land Between bioregion. That's available on the Snake Supervisors page of the Land Between website. You can access this presentation by going there or just by clicking on this link. I highly recommend that you take the time to work through that presentation, as it'll help you get prepared to identify some of the cool critters you'll hopefully find under your cover boards this summer. So what is a cover object? Essentially, a cover object is anything that a snake can hide under or hang out underneath. For our purposes, we'll be dividing the conversation into the difference between an artificial cover object and a natural cover object. So an artificial cover object will be something that you place out on your property this year, specifically for the purposes of monitoring snakes. Really, you can use any kind of scrap material. The bigger and flatter, the better. But what we recommend is plywood. That's about 1/4 to 3/4 inches thick. Or another wood-based material can also be used. You can also use thin pieces of metal, but in very warm conditions, the space under the metal can reach temperatures that can be deadly to snakes or their eggs or other creatures that might hang out under the cover board. So that's something to keep in mind. So again, an artificial cover object is something that you're putting out on your property, scrap material, specifically to monitor snakes. And then natural cover object, which is something that will come up later on in the protocol, is anything else, any other naturally occurring log, shrub, rocks, pile of leaves on your property that was already there, and it's natural. But something to note, we're also counting artificial objects that were already present on your property prior to the start of your survey as natural cover. That's because they've been there prior to the start of the year. They're kind of a part of the ecosystem now, at least for our purposes. So let's say you have a pile of scrap wood on your property. We definitely encourage you to survey for snakes under and around there, but if you do find one, you would mark that you found it under natural cover because you didn't find it under an object that you placed this year specifically to find snakes. Okay, now just to get into some safety for backyard snake monitoring. First, just in general, we encourage you to wear proper clothing when you're going out to do your surveys. So that includes closed-toed shoes, gloves, and long pants. You're also going to want to be dressed appropriately for the weather. So if it's raining, bring a rain jacket. Obviously, bugs are an issue as well, so bug spray or a bug suit or anything like that, anything to keep yourself safe and comfortable while you're out surveying for snakes. Another general safety tip is to beware of wasps. Wasps have been known to build nests under cover boards, so be sure to look for signs of wasps before you lift them, just because we don't want to make the wasps angry or bother them unnecessarily. We also want to advise that you do these surveys in the daylight. Just makes it easier for you to see snakes and ensures that you can see where you're going so you don't accidentally trip over anything in the dark or anything like that. And lastly, we want to encourage you to use proper lifting techniques when you're lifting up a cover object to look underneath it for snakes. So that means both lifting with your knees and not with your back, but also ensuring that when you lift a cover object, you're pulling the object towards you so as to maintain a barrier between you and whatever might be underneath that cover board that you might be surprising. But we'll go over this again in a little bit. Okay, so next, a little bit of safety about snakes in general. It's important to note that all snakes are shy creatures with very poor eyesight, and they'll only strike or bite in defense. So if you don't bother them, they won't bother you. That being said, some snakes will put on a show and do their best to intimidate you if they are scared. One very good example of that is the eastern hognose snake, which you can see in the picture here. We like to call her the drama queen of the land between because when this snake feels threatened, it puts on the most impressive show of all. It will puff out the sides of its head to look like a cobra, which you can also see in this picture. And of course, we don't have cobras in Ontario. So that's step one. If that doesn't work, they might give a couple bluff strikes, so pretend to strike at you. And then if that doesn't work, they'll play dead. They will flip over on their backs, they'll writhe all around, they'll stick their tongues out, they'll emit this really disgusting smelling odor, all in an effort to make themselves look dead, because who wants to eat something that's dead? So quite dramatic, but effective. And some snakes are pretenders. So some snakes, when they're scared, they'll try to trick you into thinking that they're something that they're not. So, for example, the eastern fox snake and milk snake will sometimes rattle their tails in an effort to trick predators into thinking they're a venomous rattlesnake, but they're not. So it's important to use all of the tools that you're given. So the Snake ID decision tree, the Snake ID sheet, the Snake ID training presentation, all of these tools to make sure you're making a proper identification or do your best to make a proper identification and know what you're dealing with. Next, a bit about safety regarding the Massasauga rattlesnake specifically. The Massasauga rattlesnake is Ontario's only venomous snake. It is very shy and timid, and it will only bite as a last resort if it feels threatened. That being said, if you live near or are in Massasauga habitat, you should take the necessary precautions to make sure you're protecting yourself, but also the snakes. So be sure to pay attention to where you're walking to avoid accidentally stepping on it or any other wildlife for that matter. Wear closed-toed shoes and long pants, and don't put your hands under or in anything that you can't see into or underneath. If you do happen to encounter a Massasauga, be sure to keep a respectful distance and don't attempt to touch it or pick it up. If you are bitten by a Massasauga, it's important not to panic or do anything too strenuous. Just call 911 and seek immediate medical attention. It's worth noting that only 2 deaths have occurred in Ontario in the past 50 years as a result of a Massasauga bite, and both were the result of not seeking proper medical attention. So again, these are really shy animals, and if you don't bother them, they won't bother you. And lastly, just a little bit of safety for the animals specifically. First, we want to encourage you not to attempt to catch or harm any snakes or other wildlife that you come across in your surveys. We also would like to ask that you check underneath your artificial cover object or natural cover object, check underneath anything before you step on it, because we want to avoid accidentally squishing somebody that might be underneath it. And then we also ask that you make sure any animals that were underneath a cover object have moved before you replace it, because even the slightest pressure when you're, putting a rock or your cover board back in place could do some serious damage to the animals, and we don't want that. Okay, so before we go about placing our own cover boards in our backyard, it's probably useful to know what exactly suitable snake habitat is, and therefore where you're most likely to find a snake. So specific habitat preferences vary quite a lot according to the type of snake, but the best place to find a variety of snake species are in semi-open habitats such as rock outcroppings, clearings in forests or the edge of forests, in fields, meadows, savannas, or prairies, at the edge of wetlands, and on shorelines of water bodies like lakes or rivers. So it's in semi-open habitats like these areas that are near areas of natural cover where snakes can seek shelter from predators and also seek shade. And again, like we said on the slide where we were discussing what a cover object is, natural cover here can mean anything from a rock pile, tree stumps, low shrubs, any kind of vegetation. So anything like that is something to look for. Okay, so given what we just learned about what makes habitat suitable for snakes, good places to consider placing your cover boards are in dry, open to semi-open habitats that don't have any nearby natural cover, because your cover object will serve as the natural cover. In relatively flat, sunny areas that don't have any moist or rotting vegetation underneath them, so you don't want to be putting your cover objects on top of anything wet or moist or decaying. And then specifically, if you're surveying for semi-aquatic species, you want to place your cover boards about 10 meters or less from the edge of the water. And if you like, the Land Between would be happy to come and take a look at your property to identify what the most suitable snake habitat would be, and advise you where it might be a good place to consider placing your cover boards. Okay, so that's great. We have a good idea of where to put our cover boards. Now, how about when? When should we place them out? Rule of thumb is cover boards can be put into place in the spring as soon as conditions are dry enough. So that usually means anytime from April to May. And it's best to allow about 2 weeks after you first place your cover boards before checking them, in order to allow snakes and other wildlife time to find them. Okay, and when to survey. We encourage you to survey for snakes throughout the snake active season, which is from about April to October. But you're most likely to see a snake under a cover board from April to July in the mornings or early evenings, when the air temperature is between 10 and 30 degrees Celsius, and when the temperature under the cover board is between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius. After a bit of practice, you'll be able to recognize good quote-unquote snake sighting weather and know when you'll have the highest chance of seeing some snakes. Okay, so what will you need to carry out these backyard snake surveys? First and foremost, you need cover boards or cover objects. Like we discussed in a previous slide, plywood that's about 1/4 to 3/4 inches thick is recommended, something that looks like this, but really any thin wood-based material can be used. We recommend something that's about 2 feet by 2 feet at least, but really the bigger the better. And then in terms of the number, we recommend 10 cover objects per hectare of land, but it's totally up to you how many you want to put out. If you want to put more than 10 per hectare, that's cool. If you want to put less, that's also fine. It really just depends how many you'd like to survey each time. You'll also need a copy of the backyard snake surveying guidelines, which will be included in your volunteer registration kit, which will be emailed to you. You will need the field data sheets, which are also included in the registration kit, the Snake ID decision tree and Snake ID sheet, a pencil and pen, as well as a permanent marker, a clipboard, just to keep all your papers straight and have a hard surface to work on. You'll need a camera or a phone with a camera. I think most people nowadays have cameras built right into their phones. You'll also need a phone with a GPS or a handheld GPS, whichever works better for you. You'll need proper clothing like we discussed, so that includes gloves, closed-toed shoes, and long pants. You'll need a thermometer with a string attached to it, and that's because you're going to be monitoring the temperature under your first cover board that you place. And we ask that there's a string attached to it so that you can easily pull it out without disturbing anything that might be underneath it, because the first step will be to check the temperature and then you flip the cover board. So you want to be able to do that without spooking anything that might be hanging out underneath there. And then we also ask that you carry Ziploc bags and, of course, your Snake Supervisor badge. Okay, so throughout the procedure, which I promise we're almost about there, the next slide is when we get into how to actually go about monitoring. But throughout the procedure, you'll be following various flow charts based on what you come across while you're surveying. And one of the key questions that's asked in these decision trees is, are you seeing a species at risk snake? Have you found a species at risk snake? And so I just wanted to go over what that means. So we have 4 provincially listed species at risk snakes here in the land between. And those are the eastern hognose snake, which we have here, the Massasauga rattlesnake, the eastern fox snake, and the eastern ribbon snake. So this is generally what they look like. Again, I highly recommend that you take the time to go through the Snake ID training webinar that's also available on our website, just so you can get familiar with what these guys look like, as well as the other species of snake that we have in the land between. But you will also have the Snake ID decision tree and Snake ID sheets to help you figure out if you are seeing one of these 4 snakes. Okay, so let's get into the actual procedure for surveying for snakes in your backyard. So we've divided the procedure into 2 parts. Part 1 being coverboard placement, which again takes place as soon as conditions are dry enough, so that's probably about April to May. And then part 2 being the actual survey. So step 1 of the coverboard placement is to have your field data sheet ready. It looks like the one pictured here on the slide, and it's included in your volunteer package that is sent to you after you register. So we encourage you to put your surveyor name and surveyor ID number. Again, that will be sent to you in the welcome email. We encourage you to put that on every piece of documentation that you have, all of your field sheets, just in case they get separated for whatever reason. That way we can trace it back to you. So step 1, have your field data sheet ready and that top box filled in. Step 2 is to obtain your cover objects or cover boards, whatever you've decided to use. And if you have decided that you're using more than one cover board on your property, we encourage you to number those cover boards just so you can keep all of the information straight later on. And that's what that Sharpie or permanent marker comes in handy for now. So make it really big and obvious, and I recommend writing it on multiple spots just in case it gets washed off by the rain in one spot. And then step 3 is to place your cover boards throughout your property, taking into consideration all of the information we discussed previously. So that's we encourage you to place them in open, flat, sunny habitats that don't offer any nearby natural cover of any kind, just to encourage the snakes to use it. And as you place your cover boards on your property, step 3 is also to record the GPS location of each of those cover boards in decimal degrees. So that's an example of decimal degrees can be seen here on the sheet. So that's, 45 point whatever, and then, negative 78 point whatever. We ask that you include as many decimal points in the GPS location as possible, just so that we can have the most clear location data possible. And then we also recommend that you draw yourself a quick little diagram of where you place all of your cover boards, because, if you're placing 20 of them on your property, it might come in handy later on just to find them all. And then step number 4 is to position your thermometer. So again, there's going to be a thermometer going underneath your first cover board, and that thermometer is going to have a string attached to it so that you can easily slide it out later on. So you just want to nestle it underneath there, make sure it's not buried in any dirt or anything, but just kind of placed nicely underneath the cover board. And then the last step is to leave your boards for at least 2 weeks before you start your surveying. And after that, you are all set to go. All right, so you've placed your cover boards, you've left them for 2 weeks, and now you're ready to start surveying. So the first step on a day when you're ready to go out and survey is to fill in the general information table that will be on the data sheet that's sent to you in the welcome package. So you need to fill in your name and your surveyor ID number, which will be sent to you when you register. And that's just so that when you go to log in online to input all of your data from your field sheet to the online sheet, that's the way that we'll keep track of it all and keep your surveys specific to you. Then you want to input the survey number. So if this is your first survey of the season, that would be 1. If this is your 10th, it would be 10, and so on. Then you want to input the start time of your survey, and then when you're done, the end time. And this is just so we can assess survey effort, how long you looked. And then you want to input the date. And then once you're done the survey, you can come back to this table and input just a simple yes, no if you found any snakes or skinks during your survey. After you fill all that in, you need to fill in the weather information table. So you can just get this information off of a weather app or thermometer or whatever you have. So just the air temperature in degrees Celsius, an estimation of the cloud cover on that day. So just circle one of these. A estimate of the wind conditions. So again, just circle one. There's no wind, moderate wind, light breeze, a strong wind, and then any other notes that you have about the weather conditions that day. And then step number 2, after you've filled in all that easy information, will be to go to your first cover board and gently pull out that thermometer that you tied a string to and check the temperature under your cover board, and you'll input it in this box here. And that temperature will serve as the general temperature for all of the cover boards, so you don't need to check it under every single cover board. Okay, and once you've got all that information, you are ready to carefully lift your first cover board and see what's underneath. So again, like we talked about when we were going over safety, we want to lift the cover board towards us, just so that we keep a barrier between anything that might be underneath the cover board and us, just in case we startle it. All right, so you have flipped your first cover board, again, pulling it towards you. You take a peek underneath, and what's there? Nothing. So that's kind of a bummer, but that's okay. It's bound to happen. So in the protocols that you'll be sent when you register, you'll have a decision tree in the protocols that distinguish what the steps are depending on what you find under the cover board. So here is a chunk of the decision tree, wherein you flip the board and you find nothing. Okay, so then you continue on and you answer the question, are you looking under or around a cover board or pre-existing cover? Because not only are you surveying under the artificial cover objects that you place, we're also encouraging you to look around natural cover as well. So just, taking a peek under bushes, logs, anything like that that you come across as you move from cover board to cover board. So let's say you flipped over a cover board, there's nothing there. Okay, so it's a cover board. Then you need to ask yourself, is the underside wet? If it is, flip the wet side of the cover board up, so just flip it the opposite way that it was, and put it on the ground somewhere nearby. Now you don't need to bother taking a new GPS location for this because it'll be close enough. And then after that, you can record your data, which in this case is no observation, in table A of the data sheet, which will look like this. So in this case, again, let's say you flipped cover board 1, so you would put 1 in this box here. Snake or skink found, you would put no, and then you could just draw a line through all of this because you didn't find anything, and then also just put a no here, or a slash through it to indicate nothing was found. And let's say you flipped a natural cover object and nothing was there. You ask yourself, are you looking under or around a cover board or natural cover? If it's natural cover, you can just replace the cover object and continue on your survey. You don't need to record anything in any data sheets or anything like that. Okay, so let's say you have flipped a cover board or a piece of natural cover, again, a log or something like that. You flip it over and you see a snake. That's fantastic. That's what this is all about. So the first thing you want to do is take a picture of that snake, take as many pictures as you can, and try to ID the snake. Now, as I said in your welcome package, we will be sending you a couple of resources to help you identify the snakes that you find, one of which is a snake ID decision tree, which will look something like this. It'll be broken up a little bit just so it fits on a nice piece of paper, but it'll look like this, and similar to the protocol decision trees, you answer these questions to yourself, and it will direct you to a snake that it might be. So for example, let's start at the top. You found a snake. Cool. Is it striped, all one color, or blotchy? So let's say the snake I found is all one color. All right. Is the snake you found bright green? If yes, you're looking at a smooth green snake. If no, you have to ask yourself, is it dead? Let's say no, my snake is not dead. Does it have a distinct yellow band all the way around its neck? Yes, it does. Well, fantastic. Then you're probably looking at a ringneck snake. This ID tree also has a couple of instances where, you go through, you answer the questions, and something might have gone wrong, or you're looking at a kind of a tricky snake, you didn't get a good look at it maybe, and the decision tree will point you to please try again. If that happens, it's no big deal. Maybe try working through the decision tree again. Or if you're really stumped, you can feel free to text a photo of that snake to the START hotline. And the number is listed in the protocol multiple times as well as in this decision tree. And they will give you a hand in trying to identify that snake. Also included in the volunteer package to help you identify the snakes that you find is a quick snake ID sheet that has photos and a brief description of each of the snakes, each of the 12 snakes found in the land between. So if you're having a bit of trouble, if you want to confirm the ID that you've made, you can use this sheet as well. It goes into a bit more detail than the decision tree, and again, gives you some pictures, which can be really helpful sometimes. Okay, so you flipped your cover board or natural cover object and you found a snake. You've taken a picture of that snake, you've done your best to try to identify that snake, and now the next question is the snake you're seeing one of the snakes listed in section G of this protocol? And section G is the one that lists the 4 SAR or species at risk snakes we have in the land between. And whether or not you're seeing a species at risk snake or a non-species at risk snake makes a big difference in what you're going to do next. So remember, those 4 species at risk snakes are an eastern ribbon snake, eastern fox snake, Massasauga rattlesnake, or eastern hognose snake. And the reason the protocol will differ so greatly if you find a species at risk snake or a non-species at risk snake is the species at risk snake are of particular interest for our research. So we are going to ask that you call us if you come across one of these. Okay, so let's go through this flow chart. So is the snake that you found one of the snakes listed in section G of this protocol, i.e. is it a SAR snake? Yes. Then the next step is that we ask that you text a photo and a GPS location in decimal degrees to the START hotline. And that number is listed there, but it's 705-955-4282. So you're going to send as many of those pictures as you took of the snake, as well as the location that you found it at, to that START hotline. Okay, and then you need to ask yourself, are you east or west of Bancroft, the town of Bancroft? If you are west of Bancroft, we're going to ask that you follow up that text that you just sent to the START hotline with a call. So we're going to ask you to call that same number. And depending on where you are, what SAR snake you found, depending on a lot of things, the people at START hotline from Scales Nature Park will give you further instruction about what they'd like you to do next. So you give them a call and wait for further instruction. After they've given you your further instruction, you can continue on. So then you need to ask yourself, similar to when we found nothing under a cover object, did you find this snake under a cover board or natural or pre-existing cover? If you found it under a cover board, ask yourself, is it wet underneath? If yes, just flip it dry side up onto nearby dry ground and record it in table A as you did before. If it's not wet, you can just replace it the way it was, but remember to make sure any critters that were underneath the board have moved before you put the board back. If you found the snake under some natural or pre-existing cover, just replace the cover object again, making sure that the snake has moved before you do so, and record that you found that snake in table B of the data sheet, which looks very similar to table A. It's just that there is no column for cover object number or cover board number because it was found under natural cover in this case. The only difference in what to do if you find a SAR snake comes up here. So if you're west of Bancroft, you're going to call the START hotline. However, if you are east of Bancroft, that is out of the permit zone for the folks at Scales Nature Park. So you're just going to, after having texted them a photo and GPS location, you'll just skip the calling step and continue on to the rest of the flowchart. So you answer those same questions that we just went through. I would just like to stress the importance of waiting until you get in contact with the folks at the START hotline before moving on to this next step. Because again, they might ask you to do any number of things, and it's important not to move on until you've had contact with those folks. Okay, so let's say you flip the cover board or a natural cover object, you see a snake, you take a picture, ID it, and you determine it is not a species at-risk snake. It's not one of the 4 snakes listed in section G of this protocol. So then you're here. So then the next step is to ask yourself, is the snake you're looking at dead or alive? Hopefully it's alive. So if it's alive, you just need to make sure that it has moved before you replace the cover object, because again, we don't want to squish it. You continue on, and then you ask yourself those same questions we've asked in the previous 2 decision trees. Did you find it under a cover board or natural or pre-existing cover? If it was natural or pre-existing, it goes in table B of the data sheet, and if it was under a cover board, it goes in table A of the data sheet. If the snake that you found is dead, the only change is that you just need to move the snake out of the survey area or out from under whatever cover object you found it under, just so that you don't double count it the next time you're doing a survey or surveying under that cover object. And I'll just take this opportunity to talk about these flags that occur throughout the entire decision tree, as well as the snake ID decision tree. These flags are just to point you in the direction of relevant sections of the protocol. So in this case, it points you towards section A2, A3, and A4 when you come to this step in the decision tree. And the A section is the safety section in the protocol. So this is just to remind you to refer back to that safety section so that you're doing everything you can to keep yourself safe, as well as the snakes or other animals that you come across. Okay, lastly, the last scenario you might come across when you're surveying under a cover board or natural cover is that you flip your cover board and it's not a snake that you find, but it's some other kind of cool animal. And when I say cool, I mean it could be absolutely anything. You can feel free to report anything that you find. But we're particularly interested in snake skins, skinks that you find, as well as any salamanders that you might find. But again, you can feel free to report anything. So you've carefully lifted the cover object towards you, you've taken a peek underneath, and what's there? A skink, salamander, or another cool wildlife or evidence of wildlife. So again, that's a skin or maybe some scat of some sort. Take photos of whatever you're going to report, and then ask yourself, is it a skin, a snake skin, a skink, or other wildlife? Let's say it's other wildlife. So if you can, we'd like you to identify the wildlife or evidence of the wildlife if possible. And then just again, make sure that whatever it is moves, if it's alive, before you replace the cover object. And then again, this is the same set of questions that we've asked in previous sections of the decision tree. The only difference in this section of this decision tree is that if you were looking under a natural or pre-existing cover object, you again replace the cover object, but then you're going to record your findings in Table C of the data sheet. Table A is for findings under cover boards, artificial cover boards that you've placed yourself specifically. Table B is for findings of snakes under natural cover or pre-existing cover, and Table C is for any other wildlife that you find not under a cover object. And then lastly, we'll come back to here. If it's a skin that you found under your cover board or natural cover object, we're going to ask that you attempt to identify the skin if you can. There's lots of great online resources to be able to do that, but you certainly don't have to. And then you need to ask yourself once again, similar to the previous decision tree, are you east or west of Bancroft? If you are east of Bancroft, you just go back to this one that we keep circling back to. Did you find it under a cover board or natural pre-existing cover, and go in either direction. But if you are west of Bancroft, we're going to ask that you text a photo or photos, as many as you can, and a GPS location, again in decimal degrees, to the START hotline at 705-955-4282. And then after you text those images in the GPS location, follow that text up with a call and await further instruction, because the folks at START may ask you to do something else specific with that skin that you found. And again, just as before, where you're calling START for a SAR snake, we ask that you wait at this step until you make contact with them and hear what they'd like you to do before moving on to the next step. So that is pretty much it. After you make it to the end of one of these branches of a decision tree, and you've recorded all of the necessary data in the relevant table in your data sheet, we just ask that you repeat the steps outlined in the flowcharts and in the protocol until you've surveyed all of your artificial cover objects on your property and all of the natural cover in between those cover boards. And you just keep repeating these steps until you're done for the day, and that counts as one survey. And then you can survey your cover boards as often as you like, from every other day to once a week. It's totally up to you. But just remember to keep track of your survey number and fill out a new data sheet for each day's survey that you do. And after you've completed 1 day's survey, we ask that you be sure to transfer the data from your field sheet to the online reporting form, which you will be able to access via the Land Between website under the Citizen Science Center tab. And from the Citizen Science Center tab, go to the Snake Supervisors page. And there'll be an online reporting form that mirrors exactly your field sheets, and you can just quickly transfer your data over, as well as upload any photos of snakes or other wildlife that you found. And I just want to remind you to please include your surveyor ID number in the online reporting form. Again, that number will be sent to you when you register. And that's just how we're going to keep track of everybody's data, so we can keep all of your surveys from your property in one place. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to work through it. If you have any questions about this presentation, any aspect of the procedure or the Snake Supervisor program in general, please don't hesitate to contact us. We can be reached by email at the citizensciencetlb@gmail.com or by phone in the office at 705-457-1222. And I'll just remind you that we have other snake-related webinars available on the Land Between website as well. There is a snake ID workshop that takes you through how to identify each of the 12 species of snake found in the Land Between. There is also a webinar that takes you through the snake road surveying procedure. It just kind of goes over what to do if you come across a snake while you're driving from point A to point B. They're very informal surveys, but it's valuable data that you would be collecting. So if you're interested in doing that as well, you can find information on that and the webinars for the training on the procedures at the Land Between website. Thank you.